Recording. Okay. There we go. Folks are coming in. Yay. Okay,
Excellent.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
All right, welcome to everyone who's here so far. We're super excited to be with you. And we're just gonna give it a couple minutes for folks to get on and get signed into the reading group. So bear with us.
Oh, and to the question about gallery mode. So I think this is actually a slightly different configuration of Zoom. It's a webinar format rather than a regular Zoom call. And so the features are slightly different. And in full disclosure, this is the first time that we've used this format too. So we may be figuring them out as we go along.
Okay, Lauren, I'm gonna share my screen to get the slides started.
Okay, great. Yeah, are we gonna start on MIT time or clock time?
That's a good question. Let's do the happy medium, maybe like 12:03.
Okay, okay.
That'll give the slightly late people a chance to get in. Okay, share screen. Go. All right, if you just got here, welcome. We're going to be starting in about 2 minutes. And it's great to see everyone saying hello. Hello to all of you too who are saying hi in the chat. We are also super excited that you came today to do this first introduction and the first version of the reading group, which we're making a weekly event. That's great. Actually, I feel like I'm on Twitch right now because the chats are going by really fast. This is awesome. Okay, great question. Thanks, Catherine Harris, for asking this question. Folks are free to chat with each other in the chat box for the reading group. But if you want to put a Q&A question, like something that we would actually discuss, we're going to be doing a short presentation. If you want to do a question that we would actually discuss, like in response to what we're presenting about, put that in the Q&A section. But feel free to use the chat and just do tons of shout outs and chat with each other and things like that.
This is so exciting. People are everywhere. I guess that's the internet, right?
This is amazing. Yeah, I mean, if we ran a reading group in, Boston or Atlanta, we wouldn't have had this group. So it's amazing. They really are everywhere. Wow. Wow, shout out to Argentina. Hello. Hi, Lizzie in a moving car. Chapel Hill in the house. Stockholm, Jakarta. Wow. Amazing. All right, well, let's get started because we don't have that much time, and Lauren and I have so much that we want to share with you. So an official welcome to everybody to this first instance of what is going to be a 9-week reading group. And we hope that you all will stay with us for as long as you can, or as long as it holds your interest. So each week, the general structure of the group is each week we're going to be reading one chapter of Data Feminism. Today we're starting with the intro chapter. And the general format is that Lauren and I will do sort of a short presentation. We have a couple of sections that we're going to have like sort of regularly featured, like our favorite footnote from that chapter. And then we'll open it up for questions and discussion, which I think will be mostly Q&A, sort of in the Q&A box with us, since so many people registered. There's just no way we could have everybody have videos. So, you know, without further ado, maybe we'll just jump in and get this started. So welcome, and my name is Catherine D'Ignazio. I'm an assistant professor of urban science and planning at MIT, and that's a new position. Prior to that, I was at Emerson College for 5 years, based in Boston and Cambridge in the United States. And I'm also the director of the very newly formed Data Plus Feminism Lab at MIT. And so Lauren, take it away.
Hi everyone, my name is Lauren and I'm Associate Professor of English and Quantitative Theory and Methods at Emory University, where I also direct the Digital Humanities Lab. And like Catherine, this is also a new position for me. Up until this past year, I worked at Georgia Tech, and I'm based out of Atlanta in the US South. It's really great. It's great to see everyone from everywhere, and we really appreciate your taking the time to think through all this stuff with us and learn with us.
Okay. Oh, and one thing we want to say actually is this is our first webinar, so we anticipate technical difficulties. Also, we want to say that we both have children, and so we anticipate children, just so you know. Great. So before we get started, we wanted to just do an Indigenous land acknowledgement, because even in this era of everything virtual, and it's so interesting to see that we're all from many different places, we think it's really important to acknowledge our own places and the own ground that we're actually standing on today for Lauren and myself. So this Indigenous land acknowledgement was developed specifically for events at MIT by the MIT Indigenous Peoples Advocacy Committee, and we've adapted it just slightly for this presentation. So it goes like this. In exploring and writing about the imagined foundations of a society and a culture, we feel it necessary to acknowledge the very real foundation of our own. We therefore acknowledge the Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land where this event is taking place, and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land that we, Lauren and I, are on today is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation and the Muskogee Creek people. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather and perform from time immemorial. All right, so to start, we wanted to talk a little bit about the motivation for writing Data Feminism. Well, we really see Data Feminism as part of a growing body of work. You know, when we first started writing it, there wasn't really any feminist work. Critical data studies work was really just starting to happen. And then since we've been writing the book, so much work has emerged, and we've been, you know, included a lot of it. We've been really inspired by it. But we see it as part of a growing body of work that's holding corporate and government actors accountable for their racist, sexist, and classist data products. So things like face detection systems that can't see women of color, hiring algorithms that demote applicants that went to all women's schools, search algorithms that circulate negative stereotypes about Black girls, child abuse detection algorithms that punish poor parents, and data visualizations that over and over again reinforce the gender binary. So all of these things and more. And so, one of the, I feel like in me, at least, the seed of this book was born when I was a graduate student at the MIT Media Lab in 2012, which was really the moment of true hype around big data and conversations around predictive analytics and AI. And you had so many people at the time, and still are saying things like data is the new oil, by which they mean in a positive way. They mean that from the positive, meaning that there is much to be extracted from it, to be mined from it, and to be converted into profit. But in the years since my time at the MIT Media Lab, there's been big pushback and really amazing work from a whole variety of different fields where women of color, white women, indigenous folks, immigrant communities, LGBTQ folks, and more are saying, actually data is the same old oppression. We are recreating all of the structural equalities that exist already, and we're reinscribing those, and in some cases, we're really amplifying them. And so we just want to do a quick shout out to all the work. This is not all the work, this is some of the work in this vein. So things like Algorithms of Oppression by Sophia Noble, Automating Inequality by Virginia Eubanks, ProPublica's great reporting on risk assessment algorithms, Ruha Benjamin's awesome new book called Race After Technology, the Algorithmic Justice League and Joy Bolamwini, who have taken a really amazing sort of culture, poetic, really been out on the forefront of many modes of talking about algorithmic bias. And then Indigenous Statistics, which is a book written by Maggie Walter. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to navigate. There. No? Hold on. There. And I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Great, thanks so much. So, we hope that you've read the book in prep, or at least the first chat, the intro, in preparation for discussion today. So I don't sort of want to rehash exactly what we talk about there, including not featuring the same pictures, but I will sort of try to give you a little bit of a rationale for why we began the book with the story of Christine Darden, who is who you see here. And in the book, we have a picture of her in front of one of the mainframe computers that she operated, where she worked at NASA Langley's research division. This picture we didn't include because it doesn't have a computer, but it's awesome because of her outfit. Look at that. Anyway, we decided to start the book with a story of Christine Darden. As you can see, she was born in 1942. So she must be in her, 70s now? In part to draw attention to the fact that, as Catherine mentioned before, none of these problems are new, right? And not even data is new. We are right now at this moment where we're paying attention to these problems, but every single thing that we discuss in the book has a much longer history. And Christine Darden, if you remember from the book, or if you don't, she was one of the women who was really brought to national attention through the book written by Margot Lee Shetterly called Hidden Figures, which later became a movie, which much more people saw, which featured the work of 3 Black women who joined NASA at a time when NASA was segregated. And they were part of the people who participated in its desegregation. Christine Darden was actually not one of those first group of women. She's like a generation, or at least a cohort later. So she joined after NASA was formally desegregated, but it still had all sorts of issues associated with gender discrimination. And she, a little bit of backstory on her. So she had a master's degree in applied math. I think she had been thinking about becoming a teacher, but she worked in the vicinity of NASA Langley and found out that there were job openings there. And so she joined, and she was initially hired into the role of what was called a computer. Computers, and I think many people listening know this, but some of you might not know. Computers were first people. They were the actual people who performed the processing and calculations on the numbers that anyone who had sort of advanced data analytics teams in their companies, but in the case of NASA, had all sorts of space flight trajectories and propeller speeds and things like this. They didn't quite have the computing capacity to do so at this point. So they relied on people, people who had advanced degrees in math and related fields in order to do this work. Now, the thing that Darden noticed while she was at NASA was that she had the exact same degree as all of the men who were working there too. But the women were put into these computing roles where they were sort of brought into project teams on a as needed basis. They often weren't even introduced to the project team. Like the men who were running the projects often didn't learn their names. They sometimes weren't even told what type of data they were supposed to analyze. They were just expected to do the work. And she, as she, did this for more and more years, she realized that men who were doing the exact same work as her were getting promoted and rising rapidly through the ranks at NASA, and the women were not. And she decided to speak up about it. What she did, she not only spoke up to her boss and said, hey, I've noticed this thing. Why is this happening? And her boss sort of said, like, well, I just thought women liked that. That's just what they do. And actually, Margaret Shetterly has some direct quotes from Darden that we also quote in our book, so you can read a little bit more in detail about this story. But the other thing that she did, and the reason why we've chosen to begin our book with her story, is that she didn't just stop with her own situation. She actually decided to speak to the woman, another woman, working in the equal opportunity employment office there, and ask that woman sort of if this was a larger thing, because she was almost certain that it was. And together with this woman in the Equal Opportunity Office, they collected the data on the qualifications of men and women at NASA. They actually created a bar chart, and they showed it to Darden's boss, who, according to Darden, was, quote, shocked to see that this discrimination was happening. And we note in the book, and we talk about this later, and we'll probably talk about this in the week come, this idea that some totally obvious blatant systematic thing that has been happening for years and decades, the idea that the people in power would be surprised that this is happening, this is actually a pretty common reaction. In any case, once this sort of data was aggregated and shown to be this essentially a structural problem, Darden was actually able to advocate for change. Again, not just for her, she was promoted, and she actually, by the time she retired, she was a director of one of the divisions of NASA. She was the first Black woman to obtain that role. But she also helped a lot of other women of all races also rise through the ranks. So this to us is this sort of example of data feminism. What we see beginning with this belief in equality, but more importantly, sort of reinforced by this commitment to action. And there's a much more theoretical valence to this that we'll discuss a little bit later in the presentation and also in the coming weeks. But we'll stop sort of there with this intro story. And we actually just wanted to back up a little bit and just do some level setting about the word feminism. So like, what is it that we mean?
Do you see that, Lauren?
Yes.
Do you want me to go forward more?
Oh yeah, I thought you would do this part.
Okay. Do you want to go to this one?
Sure, whatever you feel.
Oh wait, you're saying I do this part.
Yeah, sorry.
Got it. Okay. Apologies. Okay, yes. Feminism. So yeah, we wanted to do a little bit of level setting. Interestingly, in 2017, in the wake of the Women's March on Washington, Merriam-Webster made feminism their word of the year. Also, what had happened that year was the Me Too movement, the rise of the Me Too movement. And so feminism, as Lauren alluded to, feminism starts off with a belief. And one of the things we wanted to say too is feminism can be a complicated word. It has multiple histories. It has multiple claims on it. Those claims are not always compatible with each other. So we think it's really important to kind of lead with where we're situated and how we define this word. So a feminist is somebody following Beyonce who believes in equal rights for men and women and non-binary people. But it's not only a belief, because if you start looking around the world, you see that if that's your belief, you see that that is not realized. We have not realized a world in which women and non-binary people can fully participate. And thus feminism implies this commitment to action. So feminism is organized activity on behalf of women's and non-binary people's rights and interests. So it's belief and it's action. And importantly, feminism is also a theory, or really many theories, and a set of ideas. And so this is one of the ways in which we use it here in the book, is we think of it as this amazing, vibrant intellectual heritage that we can draw on, and draw from many kind of time periods and many different fields of work to inform this present moment of data, algorithms, technology, AI, and equity. So the theories of feminism, the ideas of feminism, began at first by thinking through issues of inequality in respect to sex and gender. That is their starting point. But the past 40 or so years of scholarship, as well as our own current political reality, have brought many more dimensions of inequality into the equation, including race, class, sexuality, ability, and more. And this, I will pass it to Lauren.
Okay, great. So this sort of a gradual and necessary broadening of feminism to sort of the shift from thinking about gender inequality to really thinking about the reasons behind gender inequality, which have to do with power, right? Like who has power and who is enforcing these systems, and then who doesn't have power and who ends up being marginalized by these systems. The idea, this shift is really largely due to the work of intersectional feminism. And intersectionality, as you can see in the slide, it's a concept that comes out of Black feminism, a course, a sort of body of work and action and community building, largely charted by groups like the Combahee River Collective, and we'll have more to say about them a little bit later, and scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw, who uses this idea of intersectionality to explain how social inequality can't be explained one-dimensional difference like gender. So when we're talking about inequality or oppression, we must talk about the intersection of the many factors and forces that produce it, by which we mean not just sexism, but also racism, classism, ableism, imperialism, and so on. But the key thing to understand about intersectionality, and it's actually a thing that's often overlooked, is that intersectionality doesn't just describe these sort of markers of individual identity and their effects. It describes the structural forces of power and their intersection that create those effects, right? And it's the work of women of color feminists and Black feminists in particular that have foregrounded this conversation about structural forces, which in turn is sort of what allows us to use feminism as this lens to understand the structural forces that sort of underlie our current data-driven society. And I think I noted before, we sort of start our history in the book with the Combahee River Collective and Kimberly Crenshaw, but it's really worth noting that the idea was described by many others before her. So probably, you know, in the 19th century, there were Black women scholars and activists like Anna Julia Cooper, Frances Harper, Sojourner Truth. All of these women, these thinkers, described intersectionality in practice, if not by name. So in any case, so like the short sort of takeaway from this slide is intersectional feminism, which provides the underlying framework for our book, isn't just about women and gender. It's about power, right? It's about who has it and who doesn't. And the reason why this matters is, in today's world, data is power. So much so that we just, you know, this is it. That is the reality of our world today, right? We see this in that sort of data is the new oil metaphor, both how those who have the ability to extract its resources are really excited about the potential for profit and gain on the one hand, and the people who have their data extracted immediately recognize the fact that data is the new oil as a terrifying thing and an awful metaphor, and one that needs to be pushed back against. You know, so we see it in phrases like that. We see it in the assertion that data is the same old oppression. And so we just have this general sort of the gambit of the book is that intersectional feminism, when applied to data science, can help that power be challenged and change. So our argument really is that data science, it needs feminism, right? And it needs intersectional feminism in particular if we ever hope to overturn these power imbalances. So just to give you a sense of sort of how we arrived at the thing, which many of you, thank you, own and, you know, are holding in your hands. You know, in order to get to the book, Catherine and I we just sort of sat down, and this was really the beginning of our process. We asked ourselves, what have we learned from all of our schooling and all of the different forms of feminism and sort of our experiences and our various activist communities and the other things we know about other people's feminisms that might not be our own. You know, how can we sort of distill all of these ideas into a set of principles, and that sort of encapsulate to us the most important aspects of intersectional feminism as they relate to data. And so here they are, and Catherine's going to talk a little bit more about them at this point.
Yeah, so like Lauren was saying, our goal was to sort of take as much as we could take from feminist thinking and theory and activism and writing, and then think about models that we could provide for folks that might guide the work of people who are working with data, who want to work with data, or also who may want to refuse to work with data, because refusal, especially in certain very harmful instances, is the most ethical pathway. And so the principles that we came up with are these. This is how the book is structured, which if you have the book, you've seen this already. Each chapter corresponds to one of these principles. One of the things you'll note is that we have two chapters about power, and that's because power is so central to any kind of feminist approach to a situation. A feminist approach is, in a sense, an approach that acknowledges unequal power structures and that works to try to change them. And so we have a chapter about examining power, meaning sort of really understanding how power works in the world. And then a chapter about challenging power. So thinking about, okay, if we understand it, but it's not enough. Again, remember the definition of feminism implies this commitment to action. So it's not enough to only understand, we also have to be working to challenge those unequal power structures. Then we talk about rethinking binaries and hierarchies, which we'll get a little bit more into later, but much feminist work has looked at challenging binaries, the binary being the gender binary in particular, because, as we say, like a binary hides a hierarchy. And so usually if you're presented with this kind of dualistic fake choice, usually it means one thing is better than the other thing, or one thing is more highly valued. We see that in like man, woman, we see that in nature, culture, we see that in reason and emotion. Those things are gendered, and one thing is sort of valued more highly, and it's the thing that's associated with the masculine. We advocate for elevating emotion and embodiment, which again we'll get to, but not trying to exile emotion from a data science process. What happens when we embrace emotion and we think of our bodies as amazing collectors of empirical data of lived experience. We talk about embrace pluralism, which is about the process of making knowledge and thinking about who is at the table when you are engaged in any kind of knowledge making process and who needs to be at the table. Context, which is so deeply important, especially when we start to think about databases, spreadsheets, data analysis. Those are abstractions, and that's just, in a way, by definition, a data is going to reduce the world. But it's one of the challenges to do ethical work as a data scientist is to think about how do we reconnect those abstractions back to the worlds that they came from, back to the bodies that they came from. And then finally, making labor visible, which is about really thinking through the labor that's involved in both building a single data product, but also the labor that's involved in our increasingly data-driven economies, which try to hide so much of that labor behind the scenes. So for the rest of today, we're going to take a quick look at some of this deeper history of intersectional feminism and look at the Combahee River Collective's really incredible statement. We want to show you some examples of what we mean by data science, because actually we want to redefine data science, basically. We want to show you our favorite footnotes. So that's going to be a recurring section where we pick out our favorite footnotes. And we talked about this because we really didn't want people to miss the footnotes. Like, there's some really good stuff there, both in terms of work that's cited in the footnotes, and also in terms of snarkiness and opinions and jokes. So we're going to call attention.
Have opinions?
So we're gonna drive some of your attention to the footnotes that we really like, and then we'll do hopefully we'll do some Q&A, and we'll have time for upvoting questions. So as people are doing questions in Q&A, please upvote the questions that you would like to see us answer, and yeah, we'll take it from there. Okay. Oops, sorry, I don't have control over my slides. There you go, Lauren.
Okay, super. So now we're into exciting territory, because now we're leaving what is printed in the book, and we're entering into sort of what we think is important for context for you to have as you read the book. So we already mentioned Kimberly Crenshaw as the person who gets credit for coining the term intersectionality and intersectional feminism. But as we've also already said, these ideas about intersectionality were already described in theory, if not in name, for several decades, if not centuries, right? And so we thought it would be really valuable to take a closer look at what some of these theories have to say. So what you're looking at now is the beginning of the Combahee River Collective Statement. So this is a document written in 1977 by a group of Black feminists who also identified as lesbians. They were based out of Boston. And you can see here this formulation of interlocking systems of oppression. So this is really the idea of intersectionality. So they say, we are a collective of Black feminists who have been meeting together since 1974. During that time, we have been involved in the process of defining and clarifying our politics, while at the same time doing political work within our own group and in coalition with other progressive organizations and movements. The most general statement of our politics at the present time would be that we are actively committed to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression, and see as our particular task the development of integrated analyses and practice based on the fact that the major systems of oppression are interlocking. The synthesis of these oppressions creates the conditions of our lives. As Black women, we see Black feminism as the logical political movement to combat the manifold and simultaneous oppressions that all women of color face. So, you know, that line about interlocking systems of oppression tends to get the most attention when scholars read this graph. The next line is really important. That the sense of evidence creates the conditions of our lives. The line about, I don't know what you missed there. I saw it was muted and unmuted. In any case, well, you can read it if you didn't hear me say it. So in any case, the point being here is that this group, the people in it, they were writing from direct experience and also from a long history. So later on in the statement, and you can just Google it, there are a couple of versions of it that exist online. So later on, they traced their struggle for liberation, which they were participating in the 1970s, and it went on into the 80s, back to the experience of being enslaved. And they state really powerfully that Black women have always occupied an adversarial position to white male rule. And you can read more about that in the statement, but I'm just going to jump ahead to one last quotation, which is this. And you can sort of read it. I'm actually not going to read this whole statement out loud, but hopefully you can read as I talk. So another thing that's really important to note is that the Combahee River Collective was very explicit about foregrounding their own freedom struggles. And so you can see here that they write, we believe that the most profound and potentially most radical politics come directly out of our own identity, as opposed to working to end someone else's oppression, which I think, you know, as a white person, as Catherine, you know, that's who we are. It's really valuable to read. And I actually think it speaks to some of Catherine and my goals in writing the book in deliberately centering the voices and experiences of people with closer proximity to the issues we attempt to describe. And so that's the reason that in the book, we have a lot of quotes. Catherine actually, you know, because of her background in journalism, conducted a lot of interviews with people we talk about in the book. And that was all very intentional. But it also brings up a secondary question, which is what we can do as people who lack that direct experience, right? You know, whether because of our race or our gender or our ability or our technical knowledge, you know, any of these things which preclude us having access to that really valuable firsthand experience. And this is where the concept of co-liberation becomes really important. And so this is the belief that essentially no one is free unless everyone is free. That oppressive systems of power harm all of us, and that all our struggles are all connected, right? And in the case of data science, this means that these oppressive systems undermine the quality and validity of our work, and they hinder us from creating true and lasting social impacts. And, you know, I think it's really important to say this is a bit of an ideological stance, right? Like some people just don't believe this. And they think that like if they personally are fine, that they really don't need to worry about people who are not fine. And so I think, you know, one of the most sort of soul-searching things you really need to ask yourself is, first of all, you know, do I believe this? And if you do, then, how much do your actions actually align with that belief? Is it true that you are acting in the way that adheres to this sort of theoretical or conceptual view of how things should be? And if not, or even if so, how can I personally more fully commit to this struggle? And I'll say sort of personally, like one of the things in writing the book is I was constantly identifying the space between my, instinctive, like, yes, I totally believe in co-liberation, but then identifying the places where my personal choices really did not align with that belief anyway. So now I'll switch back to Catherine.
Yeah, so one of the things you'll notice from, one of the things I think is important about the introduction is, if these are our principles and these are our values, we actually need to redefine data science. We just basically need an expanded definition of what counts as data science. And so we say that really directly in the introduction. So a definition of a data science that seeks to include rather than exclude. It doesn't erect barriers based on formal credentials, professional affiliations, size of data, complexity of technical methods, or other external markers of expertise, mainly because those kinds of things have long been used to prevent women from fully engaging in sort of high status professional fields. And that's certainly very true of computer science and data science. But even in those fields, many of those fields were actually built on knowledge that women taught themselves and then put into practice, right? And so we make the case that we need to kind of radically expand what we think about as data science as well. And this is, I just want to say, like, this is one of the things that came up in our open review process after we published our open draft. There were a couple of comments that were like, oh, well, this particular like we were talking about, let's say, a data mural that was painted by a community based on data about their community. And somebody posted like, oh, this is a kind of very feel-good thing, but this doesn't really count as data science. Like, that's not real data science, right? And so we realized, actually, we need to be very explicit about this idea of, like, for us, that counts. We are counting much more under the umbrella of data science than just kind of your typical academic and industry PhDs in computer science or something. And so we want to show you, and then, yeah, Lauren can go further into this with her favorite footnote.
Okay, so this relates to my favorite footnote of this chapter, which has to do with this really long history of essentially this move to professionalization being one that comes along with women and non-binary people being sort of kicked out of the roles that they essentially themselves developed and created, and then things being sort of transferred over to these more formally credentialed men. And you see this, not just in data science, but everywhere, right? So, one of the canonical examples is the shift from midwifery to becoming an OB, right? So like women were delivering babies at home for millennia, right? But it was only after the advent of medical schools, which men attended, when this knowledge became sort of formalized and professionalized, and you had to go to school in order to learn it. And lo and behold, it was easier for men to attend those schools, and therefore they got the credential, and therefore the higher pay, and therefore they became valued. And then, little by little, women got pushed out. Another example that follows this exact same trajectory is cooking. And this is when, like, as soon as you think about it, you're like, oh, it's like, well, who does most of the cooking at home? It tends to be women and non-binary folks. What is the majority of famous chefs? They're men, right? This is this move that you see everywhere all the time historically, and here it is happening in data science. Cue Christine Darden, or any of these other examples.
Great. So with that in mind, we wanted to just give you a couple of examples of things that we consider to be data science. So one of my favorite works of data-driven art, which actually I still haven't seen in person, but I've heard her speak about it multiple times, the artist Stephanie Dinkins, is a piece called Not the Only One by Stephanie Dinkins, who's a transdisciplinary multimedia artist. And so in this work, she actually interviewed many women members of her family, which is their Black African-American family. And then she trained an AI to do kind of like a call and response with the person who comes to observe the object in space. And so, as she says, it's designed by, trained inclusively, and aligned with the interests and cultures of people of color. And so she, in her talk, she actually has some demos of her, like she does this sort of live presentation thing on stage where she sort of presents, and the AI is like kind of speaking back to her, but it's speaking back to her in the voices of her actual relatives that she did all these extensive interviews with for the piece. And it's absurd and it's funny, but sometimes it's very poignant and existential, and it's just incredible. And so, you know, thinking about like what makes this feminist, well, first of all, there's this explicit positioning around AI and power. So the artist is directly doing this because she's saying AI is not currently aligned with the interests of people of color. So it's like a really interesting and productive experiment to say, well, what would that look like? What would it look like to align AI with the interests and cultures of people of color? It's relational. It's actually about the relationships between this family of people. And then there's this emphasis on lived experience and the scope of a single family, a small, you know, it might be called small for data science, right? But this challenges the idea that data science needs to only be about huge global phenomenon. And it challenges the idea that lived experience is not a sort of valid form of study or of empirical information. And it's also just like wonderful to hear it talk with her. Lauren.
So we sort of wanted to present that project right next to this project, which is, you know, by all accounts, a fairly straight ahead data science project. Actually, it's a fascinating project. You can Google the title and download the paper and you can read it. It's actually, it's a very clearly written paper. You can see the people involved. It's a collaborative team. But what this project is trying to do is, as they say, see through human reporting bias. So essentially what they realized is that images, but you can see on the right, you know, how algorithms and machine learning, you know, models and stuff are trained to identify them usually involves relying upon, way back when, some people who said this is what an image is. But the thing is, people are biased. And so when you ask people, in this case, people working through Mechanical Turk, what they're seeing, they actually sort of allow their own biases to intercede. And these biases, again, don't always have to do with gender or oppression, but actually what they show us is the relationship between things that are sort of perceived to be normal or the default and things that are perceived to be not the default. So one of the examples that they give is that one on the bottom you can see. So that image C, if you had to describe that, most people say, oh, that's a yellow Vespa. Because the dominant, you know, the dominant thing is that it's this Vespa scooter and its color is yellow. But because not all scooters are yellow, you need to say yellow in order to indicate that that is, you know, an important attribute of the scooter. But if you see a banana, you just say it's a banana. You don't say it's a yellow banana, unless it's a green banana, in which case you need to say it's a green banana because most people prefer yellow bananas, right? And so they identify this as human reporting bias, this idea that humans sort of naturally distinguish between the default and the not default, and they do this in language. And this leads ultimately to, in the case of visual classifiers, less accurate visual classifiers. But if you sort of step back a layer and say, actually, what is happening here is this instance of sort of linguistic bias. We can actually use these techniques from natural language processing, identifying like adjectives and nouns, you know, comparing different descriptions of the same thing in order to isolate the scenarios that would lead to people using biased language to describe the thing that they are describing. There's a lot more to say about this paper. I actually encourage you to read it because it will both, if you're not a data scientist, it will make you feel good that you've read like an official data science paper. And if you are a data scientist, it's really clever. And hopefully it will get you thinking about the ways that even just thinking about sort of questions about assumptions and norms and biases don't just apply again to issues of gender, but issues to all sorts of unequal relations in the world. And again, with the aim of ultimately improving your work, right? Like the classifiers become better because we are able to identify these instances in which biases lead to less accurate labels.
And then our last example in this camp of expanding data science is out of data journalism. which is where I think some of the most interesting data science work is actually happening, and often like very creative. And so this is a piece by The Pudding, which is a sort of startup data journalism outfit that does a lot of really interesting and often very fun and engaging stories that we show to our students. And in this case, they broke down 2,000 Hollywood screenplays by gender and also by age of the person speaking. So they literally took each line of dialogue and matched it to the gender of the person who was speaking and their age, because they cross-reference these screenplays with a list of actors on IMDb. And then they demonstrate, you can go through the whole story, they demonstrate quantitatively that, of course, what we know is that men dominate screenplay dialogue, they dominate Hollywood. So 78% of those 2,000 films had more women, or sorry, more men speaking lines than women or non-binary folks. And then they also showed that the data in conjunction with age to show that men over 40 had far more speaking lines than women over 40. And just a notable thing that they mentioned, which I found incredible, is that there's a separate analysis about Disney films specifically, and even like Disney princess films have far more male dialogue than they have female dialogue. And even films with female leads like Mulan, actually Mulan's dragon speaks more than Mulan in the film. In any case, but so we encourage you to go look at it. But we would claim projects like this as data science as well, specifically because data journalists are doing some of the best work that's looking at using data for analyzing inequality. So there's some of the folks who have the most professional motivations to do that, and they're coming up with really creative sort of methods for doing that. So that might mean they look specifically at race and gender and other disparities using data-driven methods like this example. Or it might mean auditing algorithms or using kind of very sophisticated data science methods for actually holding big tech accountable. So a good example of that is the Markup, which is a new startup data journalism outfit. And so the thing that we want to sort of challenge here is that data science doesn't only take place in academia or in industry. It doesn't necessarily require, or it shouldn't, I mean, people will tell you otherwise, but we're saying, doesn't necessarily require advanced degrees and doesn't require a particular size of data or super technical methods of data analysis. Oops, sorry. There, Laura.
So in any case, so in case it's not already apparent, so these principles of data feminism, they apply to many different types of data science projects, right? So a project can be feminist in content, in that it deals with issues relating to gender, sexism, other oppressions, right? It can be feminist in form, in that it deliberately adopts a mode of presentation or display that is informed by feminist thinking, and we'll sort of have more examples of that in the weeks to come. Or it can be feminist in process, in that it adopts feminist methods in its project design. So in any case, so we sort of wanted to draw that last point out a little bit further in case it's not already apparent that the principles of data feminism, they apply to every single stage of a data science project, from inception and funding to production and circulation to impact in the world. And over the course of the next weeks, we're hoping to give you many, many examples of each of these different phases and sort of course, you know, not binaries, but projects that speak to feminist concerns in many different forms. And this leads to Catherine's favorite footnote from the chapter.
Yes. So my favorite footnote from this chapter was about this false binary. This is going to come up a lot. We're going to talk a lot about false binaries and how to push back against them. So in data, there's a false binary between sort of quantitative data versus qualitative data. So quantitative is what numbers, basically, kind of what you think of when you think of data. And then qualitative data is more like words and categories or survey responses or text or something like that. But as we show in chapter 4, anytime there's a binary, there's a hierarchy. And so often what gets valued, in particular in the academy, is quantitative over qualitative kinds of investigation. So quantitative is perceived as better. And so feminist researchers have consistently demonstrated the need to collect qualitative data to deeply ground one's subject matter in a context, and so on. And so, you know, one of the things that we would say, sort of pushing back on, there's like only these two types, or you have to do one or the other, because to me, at least, some of the most exciting work that's going on actually involves both of these ways. Is a more mixed methods approach, where we can value kind of deep situated context and lived experience, as well as valuing the numbers that can show a more macro picture. So just to sort of sum up here, you know, this is sort of how we think about data feminism. The book is really intended to provide concrete steps for action for data scientists who may be newcomers to feminism, to think about how feminism can help them work towards justice, as well as for feminists, thinking about how their work can carry over into the growing field of data science. It's addressed to professionals in all fields where data-driven decisions are being made, and that's increasingly all fields, as well as to communities who want to resist data or to mobilize the data that surrounds them. And then we also say that it helps folks even just understand charts and statistics in their everyday lives better. So over the coming weeks, you'll kind of be, you know, immersed in data feminism. So just a quick summary: data feminism is data science that exposes and challenges power and the intersecting oppressions that result. It's not data feminism if it's not taking on power. If it's not doing a power analysis, it can't be. Like that's I think what really distinguishes it from data science for public good or something like that. Data feminism is led by and centers minoritized people. Data feminism can be a counter data science about injustices created by mainstream data science. And there's a huge need for that, in fact. Data feminism looks at many axes of inequality, including gender, race, class, and more. Data feminism always considers process. So we have several chapters where we'll go deep into process and how inequality comes in. You know, we live in an unequal society, and that infects our whole pipeline at all the different stages. And then finally, data feminism credits labor and acknowledges how any data work, any data product is the work of many hands. So this leads us to our final, oh my gosh, we're almost at the end of the hour. We don't have a lot of time for questions. We also wanted to do a regular section where we do a feminist shout out. So one of the things we want to say is if folks want, so this is part of our secret goal. We want to learn about more amazing, inspiring feminist work in the world. If you want your work to be featured in the feminist shout out, send it along to us and we would love to show it here. But we want to do a special shout out to Indigenous Women Rising. And full disclosures, I'm on their board, but they're an incredible group of Native women and non-binary innovators in women's and non-binary folks' reproductive health, Indigenous folks specifically in the Southwest. They do incredible work, and you can follow them here. Those are their Twitter and their Instagram handles. And then Lauren, maybe you want to talk about Charis Books.
Yeah, so Charis is Atlanta's feminist bookstore. It's been around for a really long time. They sell books. So I just saw in the comments that people said the book was Data Feminism out of stock at MIT, but you can actually order it through your independent bookstore. And Charis is among those that you can use. They do great programming and educational stuff. They would have been hosting a book talk for us that got canceled, but we're going to do it virtually later in the summer. So just know about them. If that sounds like a great thing that you would love to have in your community, do some Googling and see if something like that exists in your town. And yeah. I guess we sort of knew this would go a little long. We'll try to make our talking a little bit shorter in the future. We have so many things to talk about and tell you, but we should probably talk about, answer some of the questions in the 10 minutes or so that we have left. So just to let people know who are coming in late, there's like a separate Q&A box, which is separate from the chat. You can ask questions, and then you can also like or upvote questions, and that will have the effect of bumping them up to the top. And I think we'll probably just answer them in order of upvotes, right, Catherine?
Yeah, there's one that actually got 25 upvotes.
Yeah, so, and actually this is actually a topic that we'll talk about in chapter 2 a lot more. So this is a question about the intersection between data feminism and data ethics. Are they the same? How do you think they relate or not? And what are the overlaps? And so this is actually a really good question and a really important question, because, you know, there has been so much attention, increasing attention, and justifiably so, to this field of data ethics. It seems to be a really helpful encapsulator of a lot of this type of justice-oriented work that is happening. And it seems to have found a lot of resonance in corporations and governments and places that actually stand a lot to gain from this type of thinking. You know, we definitely see our work as part of this larger umbrella, but we also do want to push back a little bit about this idea of data ethics, because one of the things that thinking about ethics rather than sort of larger movements and struggles towards justice tends to do is focus on remedying the problem after the fact, or really examining sort of scenarios and situation-based ethical problems that emerge, rather than taking a view of sort of the larger structural problems that contributed to the ethical dilemmas in the first place. And so one of the things that we try to do with data feminism, which we do explicitly in chapter 2, is to say what you actually should be doing if you are concerned about data ethics is taking a step back and saying, okay, well, how is this work and this mode of thinking and the people involved in it, how are all of these people situated in the world? And what are these larger structural problems that, again, have existed for, you know, years and decades and millennia that have sort of brought us to this place? And how can we think about changing those structures rather than constantly sort of providing patches to problems as they unfold in the world? I don't know, Catherine, if you want to add on anything to that.
Yeah, the only additional thing I'd say is, yeah, I think that, you know, I can see why ethics has sort of taken hold in more technical fields as a frame of reference, because ethics is often something that ethics are often abstract, right? And so like they're, you know, sometimes if you're talking about sort of procedural ethics or something like this, they're easier to implement as like rules, right? So it'd be so nice if we just had some clear set of rules for like what a computer should do at any given point. But I think what, where data feminism is different is it brings us back to bodies, and as Lauren was saying, brings us back to history and to historical injustices. And so that is often the dimension that is like completely exiled from ethics, is the fact that we don't arrive to this present moment in equal positions of power. We don't have the same opportunities and possibilities, right? And so that's what tends to make me, which is not to say like don't do data ethics, because there's a lot of really good work happening in ethical spaces as well. It's just that if we are not thinking about history, if we are not thinking about these, if we're not thinking about structural oppression, what Patricia Hill Collins would call the matrix of domination, then we are just, there's a huge sort of blank area of how we can proceed ethically. So yeah, and yeah, in chapter 2, there's like a little table where we say like, let's talk about justice over ethics. Okay, so next question from Catherine Plone. How does our definition of data and what counts as data change through the lens of feminist data science? In my thesis work, redefining data has helped me wait to the idea that embodiment is key. So yeah, I think we sort of explained sort of how we want to redefine data science. And on the question of embodiment, I would say we're wholly right there with you in thinking about not only what counts as data, but yeah, what do we value as data, right? And thinking about how one's lived experience is a very valid form of empirical data, empirical knowledge. And it's traditionally not been the case. And it's, you know, if you look at things like how women's, and especially women of color's expressions of pain, for example, are ignored in the medical field, you know, this testimony from lived experience is often overlooked, particularly in a kind of like male-dominated society. And so, especially with the Elevate Emotion and Embodiment chapter, we really want to kind of call our attention back to, especially when data are representing people or some kind of aspects of people's experience, more directly linking those and remembering what those links are provides a clearer sort of ethical path. But Lauren, what do you have to say about that?
No, I mean, absolutely. All in on that example. I think that, the other thing that we talk about in the book too are the points when data either fails to capture the realities of lived experience, and therefore it is clear that you should sort of defer to lived experience even in the absence of data. And then the points in which, precisely because of that lived experience, you don't want data because that data could be harmful. But we'll talk more about that issue in the chapters to come. Catherine, I feel like we should just take the last couple of minutes to talk about the third question by Eliza Vermillion, because it relates, I think, to this chapter. We might not touch on it in the future, and it has to do with the negative connotations of the word feminism. Eliza writes, when I use it, my husband cringes. Many other men and women I know have very negative associations with the word. And I think, there's a lot to be said about this. We could sort of do a whole sort of share about the word feminism and its uses and its sort of negative connotations. I think I'll say very, very briefly, the negative connotations, I think, sort of come in these cyclical waves, and they come from both within and without. And some of them, actually many of them represent valuable critiques, particularly when you see, for instance, queer women critiquing straight women for excluding queer people from the feminist movement in the 60s and 70s, as we saw, women of color critiquing white feminism for being excluded. And those are critiques, sort of mounted from within with a shared goal, right, which is broader equality and sort of abilities to thrive in life. I do feel like there is a political nature of the external critiques on feminism, and we could get into the history of that, but that tends to be cyclical, and it sort of tends to be a backlash against the moments in which feminism really does gain steam across a broader portion of the population. And I think, as always, it's like, look at the context. What exactly is it that people are upset about that they think feminism means or represents? And when you're able to identify that and be explicit about that, it often is revealed both that feminism means so many different things that you really do need to be explicit about what you are saying when you use that term, but also that there's sort of a thing to the side or a thing surrounding the word feminism that should address either, as bolstering or sort of redefining or expansion of feminism, or from the outside that sort of needs to be pushed back against.
Yeah, I would just add, one of the best folks I've read about this is Sarah Ahmed's work is just really incredible, and talks about all of these different sort of stereotypes of feminists and feminisms. I think that would be a great next place to go for folks who want to think more about that. But I think our kind of way forward that we found, and one of the reasons we use it in the book, is just to really, in a way, just be joyous about feminism, because feminism, again, like we said, is this really rich intellectual legacy, and we inherit it, and we can use it, and we can be joyous about it and share it with people, and it's rich and it has so much to offer. And so, as to the extent that you want to engage with folks who are negative about it, because I think it's healthy not to engage with them also. But to the extent that you want to engage, I have done a lot of, kind of educating people about what that term means in my own personal life and things like that. And so, I think there's a way to be joyful about it and just move forward and to love it. So we should probably end there, just to be sensitive to folks' time. One announcement that came up a lot in the chat is we will be recording all of these. So if you can't make it one week, you can always go back and watch it later. And when we'll record them, and then, I don't know, a day or two later, we'll be posting them on our website, which is datafeminism.io. And that's the official book's website. And we'll announce them on Twitter, I guess, probably too. So check back there for any recordings. And thank you so much for coming, for all your questions. We had so many more people turn out for this than we expected, and it's amazing and wonderful. And I had to ask MIT to up the webinar capacity. So hopefully the momentum continues, but even if we only end up at week 9 with 5 of us, it's gonna be great. So to stay safe, and everybody have a great day, and we'll see you in a week. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Can we stop recording?
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording.
Stop broadcasting.